Okay, so we're going to get started today with exercise 202, and this is kind of a step backwards from where we were. We're going to go back to the very beginning. We're going to start fresh as if you've never opened a drafting program before, be that AutoCAD or Rhino, to get everybody kind of on the same page, and we'll build our way up. I know some of you will pick this up really fast and be done with this quick, and that's okay. We just need to make sure everybody gets a certain base level, and then we'll build upon that. Couple quick reminders. Number one, next Monday is a holiday, so I won't be here, and I would suggest you not come too. And then we'll pick back up where we left off on Wednesday. So that has a way of happening. By now you should have your flash drives to start saving your work. We will use the file that we had today, that we work on today. We'll use it next class, so it's important to start saving your work. I would encourage you to use the OneDrive backup system. Using your Insight ID and tying that then to your flash drive so that you're backing up your work as you go. I think that's a good strategy. If you don't know how to do that or want some help doing that, I'm happy to help you out. But I would just encourage you to start using that to your advantage so that you don't come to me halfway through the semester and say, oh, I lost all my work, because I don't want that to happen. So we're going to start today with Rhino again. So I'm going to go ahead and double click to open Rhino. This is not a template file like last class. We had a template file. This is just a brand new file. So when I double click and open Rhino for the first time, I'm going to get this splash screen as it comes up. And once that comes up, I'm going to choose the large object inches template. And this doesn't mean that we can't type in feet. It just means that the default units are in inches. It's important to use that because most of the materials in V-Ray are tied to inches as their default unit. And so you can get some weird crossover if you suddenly pick feet or the metric system. So we'll stick with large objects, inches. We already went through kind of the overall system in Rhino. Today we're going to work just flat in 2 dimensions. We're going to stay away from the 3D. Next class we'll bring the 3D back in. We'll use this file and bring some 3D. But I think it's important to kind of talk through coordinate system, how Rhino's set up, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on the top view here so that it's the large view. And when we open that up, we see that we have a basic grid on a gray background. And this grid gives us some idea of scale and size. It's customizable, so we could change it. We can make it bigger or smaller depending on if we want it. Truth is, most people ignore it completely and just start drawing. And that's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with that. The red line here is representative of the x-axis. The green line here is representative of the y-axis. And what I mean by that is this is kind of going back to your days of algebra way back when, maybe not so way back when we're basically setting this up on graph paper. We have 2 axes, we have negative and positive, and when Rhino works to draw shapes of any kind, it works in this coordinate system. So a given control point, whether that's part of a line, it could be the end point of a line, in its simplest capacity, it would be, from this point to that point. This end point in coordinates to that end point in coordinates, x, comma, y. That's the kind of the simplest method. If we get any kind of a complex curve, it's just mathematically through a certain set of points. And so if we have a complex curve, these are the control points that are defining that curve. We need to know where those points are. If we have a rectangle, draw a rectangle between these 2 corner points, for example. So it's all based on this math. The good news is you really don't have to know much math to be able to work and draw in it. It's just important to kind of be aware of it. So what I'm going to concentrate on in this first part of the exercise here, and those of you that took my 135 class, this whole thing looks kind of familiar because I do the same introduction to AutoCAD because they're, believe it or not, very similar. We're going to concentrate on how do you input information into Rhino. And how do you control that information? Because it will end up helping you later on. There'll be a couple exercises where knowing these skills will really help you. And I'll point those out at that time. That's why I'm obviously teaching them in the first place. So we're in the top view. I know that we already have inches as our default units. We can confirm that by looking down here at the bottom. There's inches. That's good. And we're going to start by drawing our first line. So I can use the Polyline Tool here, which is directly below the arrow. I could also type in P-line or polyline. That would start the polyline. And I want to start right where these 2 axes meet. Now, you can kind of look at this and say, oh, you know, that's really close. I'm going to be right on that point. I'm going to start right there. And I can click. But when I zoom in, the closer I get, the more off it becomes. So it's not really quite there. So I say, okay, well, this time I'll zoom in really far, and I'll make sure that I get right on that point. All right, there it is. Well, as soon as you zoom in, it's closer, but not quite. So we want to actually type in where we want this line to start. So I'll zoom out. I'm going to use the Polyline tool, and I'm going to type in where I want to start. So I'll do that by typing in 0, 0. And you see up here in the command line, it says start of polyline 0, 0. So that's a coordinate. X equals 0, Y equals 0. Therefore, it's right at that origin. And so no matter how far I zoom in on that object, it's always going to be right where those two lines intersect. That's the advantage of putting it in as a coordinate. So at this point, I want to draw a line going vertically right up here at 24 feet long. So I'm going to do that by typing the coordinate of where the end point of this line would be. So in that case, I'm again working with x first, comma, y. So in this scenario, it would be x equals 0, because I want it not to go anywhere in the x direction, but I want it to be 24 feet long in the y direction. So at this point, I would type in 0, comma, 24, and then I'm going to put the apostrophe after it for a foot mark. So the apostrophe is representative of feet. The quotation mark is representative of inches, though I rarely actually put the quotation mark in because that is assumed because my default units are inches. So I'll type 0, comma, 24 feet and follow that with the Enter key on the keyboard. Now I have to zoom out a little bit to see it, but there you go. Now I have a line that starts right there at the origin and is 24 feet long in that y direction. The next piece is I want a line that is 12 feet over from this point. It's over here somewhere. And it's still up the 24 feet. So if I'm using these absolute coordinates, so this is relative to the origin or relative to 0, 0, this point is a little bit harder to come up with. So in this scenario, I have to go in the x direction 12 feet, and then in the y direction 24 feet. So my coordinate would be 12 feet, comma, 24 feet, like that. And when I type in 12 feet, comma, 24 feet, and I hit Enter, it's now drawn in that line going over. So remember, it's always x followed by y to get those two coordinates. Now for me, knowing where these coordinates are relative to 0, 0 is a little bit challenging. You know, calculating them out in your head, figuring out where they are. It's much easier to go from the last point you clicked. So in this scenario, the last point that I clicked is right here. If I know that I want a line that goes down 6 feet from that point, I can use, instead of an absolute coordinate, which is relative to point 0, 0, I can use what's called a relative coordinate. And the relative coordinate is relative to the last point I clicked. So relative to this point, if I want a line that goes down by 6 feet, I can say I want a line relative to that point. So I use the email, the little @ sign, to do this. So I put in that @ sign, 0 in the x, -6 in the y, and it's -6 feet. And I'll press Enter, and it will draw a line straight down. So using that @ sign is just a lot easier to calculate out what you want. You don't have to know where it is relative to this origin. You just need to know where it is relative to the last point that you clicked. So I can continue on here, and you see that all of this is written out in the handout. So if you go back to it, I can continue on, and I can say, okay, the next one I want to go over 12 feet in the x direction, so I can use the @ sign again. So at 12 feet, comma, 0, because it's not going up or down in the y direction. And I can press Enter. I could continue on. I want to go down by 12 feet here. I could say at, what is it, 0, comma, -12 feet. And I can press Enter, and there it is there. Now the other thing about it is I can switch back and forth. So I could go back to relative coordinates if I wanted. So this next point would be at 12 feet, comma, 6 feet. And that can get me to that point. This point down here could be at 0, comma, -6 feet. Oops. Helps if you actually type it in correctly, which I didn't. At 0, comma, -6 feet. and there it is. And then I could finish off and snap right back to where I started. I should make sure that end, mid, and perpendicular are checked. There we go. Now I can snap right to that end point. And there it is. So I have my shape drawn out, which is nice. So this is using the relative coordinates. I'm not quite sure why this version of Rhino keeps making certain lines disappear at different intervals. Depending on how much you zoom in, you can and can't see the lines. I'll have to sort that one out. So that's using the absolute and relative coordinates. Now, that by itself sometimes is too much work. And so as you will discover in Rhino, there's always multiple ways of doing the same thing. So we could also just use a direction and a distance. So I could start somewhere here randomly. Let's start right over here. I'm going to turn on my ortho, which is going to keep everything snapped in a line. The other option to that would be to hold down the shift key on the keyboard, which will keep all of the lines orthogonal. Since it's hard for you guys to see me hold down the shift key on the keyboard, I'm going to just turn on ortho here. And all I'll need to do at this point is to type the distance. So I can move right along here, and I could say, OK, I want this to be 24 feet. And it's going to say which direction do I want it to go. I want it to go up. There it is. Next distance would be 12 feet. It's in that direction. Now I want to go down by 6 feet. I want to go over by 12 feet. Each time it's followed by an enter and a click. Down by 12 feet, enter, click. Over 12 feet, enter, and then click. Down 6 feet, click. And then we can finish off the shape right there. So that, to me, is a much faster way of drawing. It's just the direction and the distance of the line. If I wanted something to be off at an angle, though, so let's say I'm doing this again, 24 feet, 6 feet, or excuse me, 12 feet. How about 12 feet? There it is. And then this next one I wanted to go off at an angle. Sometimes that's a lot harder to set up. So this would be a great opportunity for a relative coordinate. So I could say maybe at 12 feet, comma, -6 feet, and that gives me that angle. So I can flip back and forth. So I don't always use all of one or all of the other. So there's 12 feet there, and this would be at -12 feet, comma, -6 feet, and then I could close it there. So depending on what shape it is that you're trying to draw, it's useful to have an understanding of what these coordinates are and how you can weave them backwards and forwards. So these shapes don't matter. I can get rid of those shapes for right now. We're going to concentrate just on this shape, this first one that I drew, as we go forward. So those are the absolute and the relative coordinates. I'm going to then move on into part 2, which is the offset command. And so this is when I want to actually create a second line that's adjacent to this first line. So I'm going to use the offset command. I can access that by typing offset. I can also go up to curve and then offset curve. And I don't know that I could tell you where offset is in the toolbars. I never access it from there. So I look at my command line, and it says side to offset, but it also has a place where I can put in the distance. I can access that distance by either clicking on it, typing D followed by enter, because that's the capital letter in the word. Either way, we'll get there. There's my distance. Now I need to specify the thickness that I want this to be. So this is a wall, so we're going to make it 6 inches thick. So I could just type 6. I could also type 6 quotation mark so that it's specified as inches. And I'll go ahead and press enter. So now in this scenario, I can offset to the outside or I can offset to the inside, depending. So in this case, I want to offset to the inside, so I'm just going to move my mouse toward the inside of this shape, and I'll go ahead and I'll click. And that will create another line that's inside of the first set of lines. So there it is. So I have there and I have there as my 2 lines. So that's how offset works. So once again, let me do it one more time for practice. We'll go ahead and go to curve, offset curve, or excuse me, curve, offset, offset curve. My distance is going to be 6. I'll select my curve, and I want it to go toward the inside. So it's going toward this inside, and I'll go ahead and I'll click. And that gives me my first, my inside of my walls. OK, so now if you flip over the sheet, you can see the basic floor plan that we're drawing here. And so with that basic floor, I should also mention before we do anything, you don't need any dimensions on yours. So the dimensions are for your reference, but I'm not expecting you to put those on your particular drawing. So I need to be able to cut that door in the top of this set of lines up here. And so if I zoom in on that, why these aren't showing, I don't know. It's being really annoying not to see those. I'm going to use my midpoint snap, which is currently on, and I'm going to draw a line from the middle here to the middle there. So I want that line right in the middle of that wall. So there it is. Like I said, I don't know why it keeps making that top line and the bottom line disappear. There's something I got to kind of sort out with that. But it should be there. And maybe for you guys it will be there. So what I've done is I've drawn a line. I've gone to the Polyline Tool. I've snapped right to the middle of that top. And I've gone right there to the middle of the bottom of that line. And I've created this particular line. Now with that line selected, so I'm going to click on it, I'm going to go ahead and use the offset tool again. So this time I'll actually type offset instead of using curve, offset, and then offset curve. I'll type offset followed by enter. My distance this time is not going to be 6 inches. It's going to be half the distance of the front door. So in that case, my front door is 3 feet wide, so half of that would be 1 foot 6 or 18 inches. Now when I type this in, I can type in 1'6" quotation mark for 1 foot 6 inches. Or I could type in 18 inches and get the same value. So it doesn't matter whether I'm typing in feet and inches or just inches. Rhino's going to know what that distance is. So I'll go ahead there. And if I look at my options here, my distance is now set to 18. There's also an option over here for both sides. So instead of offsetting to just one side, I'm going to click on both sides, and it's going to offset both sides. And I'll go ahead and I'll click, and now I have this line and that line, which are representative of either side of that front door. So at this point, I need to go ahead and I need to trim out. I need to get rid of the top and the bottom lines, even though they're not there for some reason. And I'll do that using the trim command. It's available under Edit and then Trim. I could type in Trim, or I can come over here to this tool right there and type Trim, or click on Trim. Either way. And it's first going to ask me to select cutting objects. So this is an important place to kind of explain something. Just like in AutoCAD, how you select an object controls whether it's selected or not. So if I were to select from my left to my right, like that, when I'm dragging this box, it would select everything that is completely contained within this box, but not things that the box touches. So in that case, it's only selecting this line. If I select from the right to the left, it's going to select everything that this box touches. So in this scenario, it would be this plus the lines that it intersects. So I don't want that to happen. Rhino, by the way, you can deselect anything by holding down the Control key, and it can be out of order. So if you accidentally select something you didn't want, hold down Control, click on it again, it goes away as part of your selection. So I have those two objects selected as my cutting objects. I'll press Enter when I'm done. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim off those two lines right there. And I know this is really hard because they're not there. They're not being displayed on the screen. So I got to sort out why that's being the case. So those two have trimmed out where this door is going to be. I'll go ahead and press Enter, and now that's done. This line here in the middle can't be trimmed because it's not intersecting anything. So I have to just select it and then press the Delete key on the keyboard. And so what I was able to do is I was able to cut a hole right through the middle where that door is going to be. These are separate lines. They're not joined together yet. For interest of trying to be a clean drawing, I'm going to go ahead and select all of them. So I'm going from my right to my left. And then I'm going to join them together. I'll go to Edit and then Join, or I can type join, or I can press Control J on the keyboard. Again, all options to get to the same place. So now that's been joined. It's time to go ahead and draw in that front door. I'll use a rectangle tool. This is my rectangle corner to corner tool. I'll snap right to that corner there. And here's a perfect opportunity to use those coordinates that I was talking about earlier. So this would be at negative the thickness of the door, so 1.375 for 1 3/8, comma, negative 3 feet for the length of the door. Actually, it should be 1.75, sorry, 1 3/4, comma, negative 3 feet. And there's that door. If I want to create the arc for the door, I can do that using the arc tool. This arc start, this default one, start and angle, is too difficult to use for this purpose. I would use this one, which is the start, end, and direction at start. So we'll click on that, and we'll go from start, end, and direction at start. And there it is to get our arc. So now I have that window drawn in, or excuse me, I have that door drawn in. It's time to draw in the window. I have a window that's on the left side of this door right here. And I know from the handout that it's 1'6" from the corner of the building right here. And so what people have a tendency to do is they take the Polyline tool and they start at the corner and they say, okay, I'm going to go over 1'6", and then I'm going to go down, and my perpendicular snap is on, so there it is. And there's one edge of the window right there. The problem with this is you have a duplicate line. This line is on top of that line, and it's going to present problems. See, those two lines are on top of each other? So instead of doing it that way, we're going to use something called SmartTracking, which is a really useful thing to have. And we're going to do that SmartTracking by doing the following. I'm going to click on the Polyline tool, and I'm going to move my mouse over this corner. And when I move the mouse over the corner, you see that it snaps to the corner, and I get a little snap box that says end on it. And the point at the corner turns white. So there's a little white point. I haven't clicked anything. I just moved my mouse over that point. I will then move my mouse to the right, and that little white point turns blue, and I get a white horizontal line. This is that tracking for me. I can now specify a distance from the blue point that I want to start my line. So from that blue point, I want to go over 1'6". I'll press enter, and now my line starts from there. So I'll do that again. So there's one side. Let me go back to my Polyline tool. I'll hover over this point now. There it is. I'll move to the right. Oop. Sometimes you get an extra point, and that can be problematic. So let me get rid of those points. There it is. I'll move this direction. I get my white line. From that blue line, I'm going to go 2 feet this time. And there's the other part of that line. There we go. Now you can see it. So this takes a little bit of practice. So essentially, you hover over a point, you move in the direction you want to go, then you type in the distance for where you want to start. This is something that I really want you guys to practice with today, to feel comfortable with. It's really important as part of your drawing to be able to do that. And it's much cleaner than when you draw little extra tails on lines or whatever. As soon as if I drew this there, like that, as soon as I go to extrude this shape into 3 dimensions, I get duplicate surfaces on top of each other. Those duplicate surfaces will then have conflicting materials. The renders won't turn out. Like, it's a really bad thing long term. So we want to make sure we're being nice and clean in our drawings. So let me get rid of that duplicate line there that I don't need. There we go. Okay, so now I'll draw a little line from middle to represent the inside of the window. If I wanted to get fancy about it, I could offset that line. So I could use the offset tool, curve, offset, offset, curve. And we could say that the distance is more like, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch. And we'll do both sides. And that gives us a thickness to the glass instead. I could delete the one in the middle, and I could get a little bit more detail out of it. It's not required that you do more detail. I'm just showing you that as reinforcement of the commands that we're talking about today. So let me draw the window on the other side. Now, there's a couple different ways that I could do this. I'm going to draw it first so that you guys can see me do the SmartTracking again, but then I'll also show you how I would go about doing it. So the first option would be to take the Polyline tool, hover over this point, there it is, move to the left 1 foot 6 inches, followed by the Enter key on the keyboard, and then we'll snap down, and that creates my first line. Second line, again, I would hover over this point this time, move slightly to the left, and then go ahead and type in, 2 feet? There it is, and I'll snap to there. Then I can go ahead and go with the Polyline tool and go middle to middle. I could then do the offset curve. It's still already at 1/4 of an inch, but I'm going to set both sides. There it is. And then I will delete that as well. And that creates the second window on the other side. Now that was a lot of work to redraw it. Long term, I can use the fact that I already have one to my advantage. So I could take this window and I can mirror it over to that side. So I'll use the mirror command. This is under transform and then mirror, or I could type in mirror. And I don't have a point in the middle of the door anymore to mirror from. So I'll use the wall opposite. I'll use down here. It's still the mirror. It's still the midpoint. And I'll go across and create it that way. Many fewer steps in creating it. Furthermore, I know that there's 2 windows down here at the very bottom. So I could draw those 2 windows in by hand. Or I could take this window and I could mirror it again. So I'll go transform and then mirror. And I can drop it all the way at the bottom by using the side here as a mirror plane. So there it is. And there's that window. Now this window also has a window that's next to it that's about 6 inches away. So here's another opportunity to use SmartTracking. What frequently people will do is they'll use this, they'll go to transform and then copy, they'll snap to one corner of the window, and they'll try to figure out where this window belongs. Well, that's hard because I don't know how far it is away from a given point. So I can use my SmartTracking when I do the copy command. I'll go up to transform and then copy. I'll hover over this point, move to the left by 6 inches. And now the point that I've copied from is 6 inches away from the window itself. And I can then snap right to that point and make those two 6 inches apart. So it's just things to get in the habit of doing as you start to create it. You could, of course, just draw the window. There's nothing wrong with that. There's always different ways of creating this. I have a window on this wall. So again, I could come back and I could start drawing, hover, move up by 1 foot 6, and start drawing that way. But I could also, getting a little fancier on you, mirror this across a 45-degree line that's right in the corner. So I could go back to my transform, I could go to mirror, and I could say my mirror line, instead of being vertical or horizontal, is going to go at a 45-degree angle there to there. And it will mirror this over to that point. So I can use mirror in a lot of different ways. And I like to show you this as a strategy as you work your way through, because it may help you guys out a fair amount. A lot of the purpose of today is to just get familiar with the various commands and how do you do things, etc. I'll show you a few more ones that are kind of some of my favorite ones. But most of it today I'm going to let you guys play around with. A couple other ones that I think are good and important. Sometimes you have 2 lines. Let me turn off Ortho here for a second. I have a line here, and I have another line here. I'd really like these 2 lines to come together at a point. I can use a command called Filat to cause these 2 lines to come together. Now, by default, Filat has a radius associated with it. So it's going to be under curve and then Filat curves. And when I do that, it's going to say radius. I'm going to make this a little bigger so you can see it. And so when I connect this line to that line, they're going to be connected with an arc. Now I could cheat this a little bit by, instead of having a fillet with a radius of 6, I can set the radius to be 0. When I do that, this line and this line will come and meet at a perfect point. So it can be a really easy way of kind of connecting pieces. So if you have 2 different lines, that can be something useful to you as well. So you're going to continue on. You're going to draw the little bedroom line that goes in here, there. And we'll draw from here up to there. We would need to trim off the extra piece here, so I'll go into the trim command. My cutting lines would be these 2. I'll press enter, and now I'll cut out that particular piece and or that particular piece. I'll go back to trim. This time my cutting lines would be these 2. I'll press enter, and then I'll get rid of that piece. So again, that's trim. I think that covers most of what I want you guys to work on today. I'm going to let you guys kind of work through this a bit. I'll come around and I'll help all of you to get there. Like I said, some of you, especially those of you that have worked in AutoCAD, this will seem really easy. That's okay. We're just trying to get a baseline so that when I start talking about coordinates, you understand what I mean. When I start talking about polylines, you understand what I mean, etc. When you're done today and you've created your shape, I'm going to ask you to do 2 things. One, and first thing, you're going to go up to the File menu and you're going to choose Save. You're then going to save your Rhino file as today's exercise. So I would go onto my flash drive. I'm going to go into my OneDrive folder here. This would be under exercise 202, and I would save this as, I'm going to save myself a little bit of typing, exercise 202 for the fall of 2019, and I'll go ahead and I'll click Save. This saves the Rhino file. This is not what I want you to upload to the course website. I don't want the Rhino file. This just allows you to come back in and keep working on it. When we extrude it and bring it up into 3D, you're going to want this file. Otherwise, you'll have to draw the whole floor plan over again. So make sure you save it. So that's saved for next week. However, I want a JPEG that I can work with. Now, last class you guys did renderings. Well, if I did a rendering of this, I wouldn't get anything because it's only lines. There's no surfaces to render. So I need to just capture what I'm seeing on the screen. And I'm going to do that by clicking this little triangle right next to where it says Top in the viewport name here. I'll click that triangle. I'm going to come down to Capture, and I'm going to capture to File. This then will save a JPEG of my view. There it is. The default resolution's fine. I'll go ahead and say OK, and then I'll choose where I want to save this JPEG. That JPEG is what you'll post at the end of class today. So you have the rest of the day to do this and make your post. I suspect many of you will finish early. That's fine. If you finish early, you're free to go. Okay, we haven't gotten far enough in the semester yet for me to make you stay here and what have you. Okay, so I'm going to turn you guys loose, let you work on it. If you run into snags or questions, ask your neighbors, wait for me to come around, and we'll talk through it. Okay?